Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to a late afternoon session. I know it's a good time to take a nap before dinner, especially from the East Coast. I would love to take another one. But really quickly, I want to introduce us before we kind of go into our presentation, and then we aimed to leave some room at the end just for some generative discussion to ask questions. Since this is a fairly new topic, people might have a lot of questions about it. We're not going to be able to address all types of disabilities, but hopefully we can represent some of them here to kind of help you guys decide if this is something that you might want to try to implement at your institution or consider it, and then maybe a year later, try something different. So really quickly, my name is Nicole White. I am at Cincinnati Children's Hospital in Cincinnati, Ohio. I am an assistant professor there, as well as the program manager of shared facilities. We have 30 different shared facilities at Cincinnati Children's, and recently we just divided them in half by hiring a second shared facility manager, so I still oversee the basic sciences, while Sarah McLeod, who's also here, manages our clinical data and translational sciences. And then our next two panel speakers are also here today. Also really quickly, the information I'm going to be talking about is more representative of individuals with intellectual disabilities and an apprenticeship program that we are currently doing within our core facilities at Cincinnati Children's. And I'll get more into what that program is doing. So our second panel speaker that's going to be presenting is Terri, and Terri's going to introduce herself and then pass the mic to Susan.
I used to know how to work these. So I'm Terri Quenzer, and I wear two hats. Actually three. I came from industry. I'm an analytical chemist by training and worked, specialized in mass spectrometry and did a lot of method development in mass spec for projects at Pfizer, especially a lot of cancer projects. And had a passion for helping students see the bridge to industry employment. So that kind of fast forward, that led me to what I do now, and I'm wearing two hats with community colleges. I work at Maricosta Community College in Oceanside, California, which is North San Diego County, and from there, I work with all of the close to 40 colleges and biotech programs in California out of our 116 colleges. And I also, and in doing that, I lead initiatives for faculty for professional development and for students for work-based learning experiences. And I'm also working with the National NSF Biotech Education Center, Innovate Bio. So through both of those, I bring initiatives out and have been helping to sort of bridge the pathway between training and employment for students with disabilities. And I'll tell you more later.
My name is Susan Szathmary, so I'm an MD PhD by training, and I'm the executive director of Open Biopharma, so this is a unique training institute because we basically between the academia and the industry, and we focus on education primarily for students with disabilities, and our entire faculty has disabilities, either physical or other, and a lot of our students have disabilities, and we all trained on UDL, the Universal Design of Learning, and we also put a lot of thoughts into our facility, how to accommodate students, and our goal basically is to make sure they are successful, they earn a good living wage, and people see them for what they can contribute and not what they cannot. And I think it's really important, so I'm very passionate about that, and obviously looking, this is my paid forward time, so I had a successful biotech career, and I learned a lot of things from being in clinical work with patients and being in R&D, product development, clinical trials, and also manufacturing, which ultimately as a physician we have to appreciate, because without that we don't have anything to treat the patients with. So the focus is basically the biomanufacturing, because this is where you have a huge gap of trained personnel, so about 50 to 60% gap in biomanufacturing, even bigger gap who can actually transfer R&D into manufacturing. And we're also building a CLIA lab, so there is a a need for that. And the core facility, we actually working on a core facility, and we are a little bit different from other core facilities because we don't have a large faculty that has different needs, so we focus on one thing, and we put a lot of techniques around it. So our focus is on cell and gene therapy and exosomes, and exosome is an upcoming area, which I see a lot of clinical use for, and a lot of roadblocks. So, but gives a chance for students to learn a lot of different techniques that, from sequencing to chromatography to all kinds of imaging, cell culture, other things. So it's a little bit different, but that's kind of our passion. So this is Open Biopharma, and what we have is our training is basically make the students industry ready. So our goal is to train them on the newest things and get them basically industry ready. So that's us.
So I'm going to start to wet the surface with this presentation on just a bit of history of employment of individuals with disabilities. A lot of people, when you think of employment opportunities for people with disabilities, they go, oh, ADA, that's when it all started. Well, actually, it started way back in 1920, and I can even argue with you that it precedes 1920. Back in the 1700s, Paris was actually the first one to develop an institution, not a bad way, a good way, to support people that were deaf so that they could acquire social skills and job development skills to kind of go back into society and learn how to work with people that were hearing. Well, a lot of people from the States at the time took that idea and brought that over. I think New York was one of the first ones to have kind of an institution, that was a good one, where people with disabilities could go. Their families would actually place them in those institutions, and they would actually be educated on certain job skills so that they could be placed back into society. When all of the institutional work was going on, what kind of happened at the same time is the Civil War started. People could no longer afford to send their children there to develop the working skills that they needed, and they kind of started to be less tended to, but children still needed a place to go because their families couldn't always provide them the care that they needed. And that's also kind of when some of the care started to turn a little bit south. I'm not going to talk about the rest of that history because I don't like it. But back in 1920, we actually had the first law stated in the United States, the Smith-Vest Act. And then you can see here, I kind of broke this down into 4 eras of employment law history, where we're kind of laying down the early foundations of disability. Now, granted, in 1920 to 1945, a lot of those laws were just addressing vocational rehab for people with physical disabilities. They weren't really addressing the needs of individuals with intellectual disabilities, because this was also the time of that dark era of eugenics. And that's when the institutions were also kind of going dark, and families were just being told to put their children with intellectual disabilities into these asylums, essentially. Then in 1950 and 1970, we actually gained a lot of momentum from JFK. We all know that he had a sister who had an intellectual disability, and as he became president, he actually started to create a panel saying, hey, we actually really need to look at people with intellectual disabilities and try to find ways to include them more into society. So that's really what he kind of helped to do, and his family kind of started to implement the Medicare and Medicaid, and then Special Olympics kicked off for the first time in 1968 in Chicago. Then in 1980 to 2000, that's when we started to really get into ADA. ADA took a number of years to actually kind of get passed. You can see it kind of started in 1980, and then it didn't actually get signed until 10 years later in 1990. So a long time to get these laws into place to support people with disabilities. And then now we move into the year 2000 and onward, and we kind of call that the digital age, where we started to make things more accessible. So this is ADA that helped to lay the foundations. Now we're saying that communications need to be accessible to everyone, like the closed captions that you see here. And then the Genetic Information Act, we didn't start capturing employment statistics on people with disabilities until 2009. So it's pretty recent for a lot of this stuff to happen. So even though there's been many laws and regulations that have been kind of created and put into place over the last centuries, society's been kind of slow to keep up. And so that's why when we look around, we look at where people can be employed that have a disability, those options are still really limited. So here's some statistics later, where about only 3% of people that are STEM employed have disabilities. 3%. 70% are in most of them are in the limited sectors concentrated in food, service, janitorial, and hospitality industries. There's not a lot of options for people to find places to work. And then 62% of working age adults with disabilities are unemployed. So, yeah, sorry, microphone if you want to talk. It's a casual session, you're fine.
Yeah. Do you think that there's an internal reporting bias here? Do you think there are people that are disabled and don't want to tell,
Absolutely.
don't want to disclose? You know, is that
Absolutely.
3% real?
We can't tell. That's just been what's been reported. So absolutely. So there's a lot of things about data, right? We see that even in our own jobs as researchers, that is it actually being reported or not? But we'll get into that conversation as well today about how some people don't want to report their disability out of fear of being rejected or judged or, other things, discrimination can happen. So career opportunities for people with disabilities remain heavily restricted. Most employed individuals work in service industries with limited growth potential. Now, a little personal bit of a story. So something I didn't tell you at the beginning of this, I'm also a parent, and 2 of my children have intellectual disabilities. My oldest has autism, and my youngest has Down syndrome. And I work in a position at Children's where I can come up with crazy ideas, and they'll be like, sure, let's try it. So one of my ideas was, as a parent, I didn't like necessarily seeing people celebrating individuals with intellectual disabilities getting a job where they're just wiping tables and taking out trash. I said, my daughter's more capable of doing that because I can see what she can do at home as household chores. So I started thinking, what can she do in research? I mean, it's a similar skill set as food service and hospitality. There's things that I know that she could do. And then I had to start to kind of brainstorm on ideas and how can I get some of these ideas to go. So looking through this process, I was still met with some conversations with leaders at Children's about barriers. So the first thing I really recognized too is there's a general lack of awareness on how many people with disabilities are employed in the STEM field. Again, I'm just talking about intellectual disabilities right now. There's a cost of misconceptions that the accommodations that people with IDD are going to need a lot of accommodations, a lot of hand-holding, and they're going to be super expensive to train, and who's going to, quote, babysit them. And then there's also inaccessible environments and workspaces not designed for diverse needs. How many of you work in a research lab that can be accessible by your wheelchair? And then there's also employer bias, assumptions about capabilities and aptitude. So I know as my youngest daughter, her name's Kate, who has Down syndrome, that a test is not always going to tell people what she's capable of. But as a person and what I see and how she does things around the house, I know she's more capable than what a test can do. So how can we train individuals with disabilities that may not be able to look great on a piece of paper, but yet we know in the real world they can thrive just as fine? So those were some of the challenges that I was being met with leadership. It's like, okay, how can we do this and what can we do? We also wanted to make sure that we were going to set up a program that was going to be training for success. So we needed to provide accessible education. We needed to redesign STEM training from the start. I knew that if I was going to start a program to support people with IDD, I couldn't put them through the same training as someone without. So we had to come up, okay, what are those resources and those skills that we need? I also needed to have mentorship programs. That mentorship is where I needed to have people that are going to be willing to allow me to put someone with an IDD into their facility, be also trained, because this is new territory for them. They might not have had an interaction with someone with a disability in the past. So how can I create a safe space for them to also ask questions, not feel like they're going to be judged, and support everything that's going to come up along the way as we're rolling out this program? And then finally, another part of it, and I'm not really into the industry certification, but they can talk about it more because they're more on the industry side, is this is another alternative qualification pathway, and they're going to talk more about that through their programs. So in general, success comes through proper training and support systems. Minimal additional training can prepare people with disabilities for STEM careers. So it is possible, it is doable. I can prove it because I just did it this past year. So we had to also look at how we can create these effective accommodations as we're developing this program. We had to really focus on 4 different things. Collaborative design, where we're actually working with the person with a disability, so self-advocates. So I would do continuous check-ins with the self-advocates in a program. How's it going? How are you feeling? What's going on? Looking at the job coach and getting their perspective, talking to the staff members in the facility, and also talking to the program directors, because we did a good partnership with the University of Cincinnati on this. We also had to develop some customized solutions and develop accommodations for individual needs. At Cincinnati Children's, one of the big things that we have to kind of hurdle sometimes is badging. People have to have certain qualifications in order to be employed there, such as vaccinations. There were some people that wanted to do the program that weren't able to do it because they didn't want to get a vaccination. So unfortunately, we were not allowed to include them in our first year of this program. But those are things that we're going to have to maneuver in the future. The other things that we had to kind of customize around is we use this lovely system called Workday, and it's not transparent. So we had to figure out how we can onboard people because they were getting the emails on how to fill out information for employment, and we didn't always see them. So we had to work diligently through that process to make sure that we knew where they were in the process so they didn't get lost. So these are some things that we kind of had to get creative about and maneuver around. So the onboarding was just like a little bit of a challenge. We're still working on it, but it's going to get better as we continue to develop this process. We also had to implement and integrate accommodations into workflow. What I mean by this is we have to go around things like transportation. People don't drive. We had to figure out bus schedules, how that can align with their schedule. We have to figure out how they can learn how to navigate the building. These are big research buildings at Children's. I get lost in them. So how are we going to make sure they can get to where they need to go? And then a lot of this all together is just an ongoing refinement. And that's where those check-ins and just having like meeting, I met every month at first, and then we switched to every other month, just the ongoing refinement that was needed to make sure that they were being supported, the people that were working with them were also being supported. So getting into the other things that we need to talk about integration is these are a lot of the work-life balances that I'm also thinking about long-term as I'm furthering out this program and scaling it up, because I do want to scale this up so that eventually they can also work in just research labs, not just core facilities. And then also potentially roll this out to other organizations like yourselves. So we had to face things like transportation challenges. Many face challenges in accessible to reliable transportation. Buses are not always on schedule. Ubers may not always show up, so we had to maneuver around a lot of those things. We needed to make sure that we had some flexible scheduling in place for them. People with intellectual disabilities don't want to work full-time all the time, and some do. So how can we be flexible with their schedule and that of the lab to make sure that we can make sure they have an opportunity to do on-hand skill development and training in the hours that people in the lab were going to be there and the hours that worked for them and their transportation schedules. We also needed to look at the benefits protection. A lot of people don't want to work sometimes because they're afraid they're going to lose their benefits. This is a problem. I don't know how many of you know this, but people with disabilities are only allowed to make a certain amount of money before they lose their benefits. The catch is, if they lose their benefits, then they lose access to housing costs, transportation vouchers, medical, healthcare insurance, and I'll tell you, the income they're allowed to make it's terrible. And then there's also ideas on how we could develop remote work options, but since we were doing a lab training in this program, this was not something we did. It's just something for the future that we can work on if we want to expand this into other positions, like within core facilities or labs that can do more remote training and work. So now our program. So our program in building STEM pathways is we wanted to really make sure that we were training programs for STEM employers on accessibility, accommodations, and inclusive hiring practices. There's some hard meetings that I have as a parent in the things I hear that people say. And these are the things that you just have to kind of navigate if this is something that you're willing to do. So I'm going to tell you a lot of patience is needed, a lot of grace and understanding is needed, and a lot of education is needed. And a lot of the problems I've actually had are actually within our own HR department. One of them, I'll share a quick story, is on interview processes. So if someone has an intellectual disability and they want to apply for a job, how are they going to do it? Most of them are not going to follow it the same way that we do it. We're not going to go online, fill out an application, and then our job interview process, we're most likely not going to be able to do a great job in some Zoom settings, depending on the individual. So I said, why don't we try some skills-based hiring? What's that? Well, look, here's a new order from our Governor DeWine, who is trying to emphasize the need for skills-based training, where you can actually bring people into the lab and do a little bit of an assessment on the skills that they can and cannot do versus trying to look at what they don't have on their resume, because these individuals have not had jobs yet, and look at where we can potentially match that job to them instead of matching the job to the person. So we also wanted to make sure that we were going to have career development along the way. So how can we create pathways that are going to match their individual strengths and needs? Clearly, we're not at this step yet because we're just starting this year, but this is something I'm already trying to forward think into the future. Job shadowing is another big thing of this program. People with disabilities are not exposed to STEM fields very much in school. Reading and math are the two core things that we have to follow in our IDEA and 504 plans. Those are the most metrics that we have. Most of our state testing doesn't even have science on it. So the amount of exposure they get to science is very limited. So how can we make sure that we're exposing them to more science? This is another long-term goal and dream of mine of how to introduce this into our vocational programs that we have and also high school and middle school programs. But we also just need to open up opportunities for them to just come in and job shadow. The earlier they can do it, the better. This has been proven in other fields of science, and we all do it where we have the summer high school programs or undergraduate programs, and just learning through those experiences is a way to kind of buy people into wanting to become scientists. And then we also need to make sure we have that ongoing support for mentorship networks and resources for the long-term career success. So this is just going to be an ongoing long-term process on how we're folding out and developing this program. So I wasn't able to do this program without the support of the University of Cincinnati's TAP and CEASE Laboratory Skills Pre-Apprenticeship Initiative. This is something that I went to them with because they already had a foundation for developing skills of putting people within computer science and also in other areas. So they were working with our local stadiums on concierge resources and skills, but they were not able to find a partner to go into the STEM field. So I randomly emailed them, and literally within 5 minutes they responded. So about a year and a half ago, we started talking about how we're gonna do this and what we wanted to do. So we developed an idea on the program focus that we wanted to focus on laboratory skill development for post-secondary students with intellectual developmental disabilities. They already have a post-secondary education program that we could tap into. Very little of them knew about science, so I did a little presentation to them, and I had 3 people raise their hand that wanted to do the program. Great, because I didn't want to take more than 3 people for the first year. Through those key partnerships and the collaboration of University of Cincinnati and the permission of my very brave boss at the time, we were able to kick this program off last August. That career pathway then is something that opened up when we were using a structured pre-apprenticeship model that they actually already had in place, but I was just bending it to work for the STEM field and to allow for them to have scientific workforce entry. And you bet I turned this into a research study. So the next steps that we followed is we did the pilot phase. We actually ended up with 2 self-advocates that were successfully able to complete the program. They're going to complete it next month. We had a strong support structure and guidance from 3 dedicated job coaches and program directors, and then I was the researcher in this. The 3 facilities that we were able to work with are flow cytometry, the biobank, and the pathology. We had 1 self-advocate that was really adamant about working more hours, and so he actually worked in 2 of our facilities, and the other person worked in 1. So I think he worked in flow cytometry and biobank, and then the other one worked in the pathology lab. So I said, okay. The reason that I was able to find those facilities to do, because I had a shared facility director meeting one day, and I said, who's willing? And they were the 3 that raised their hands, so those 3 got the bid to be the first pilot on this. Through this process, I made sure I was doing an ongoing assessment with continuous evaluation, so I did a pre, mid, and post interview. I'm working on the post interviews of the self-advocates, the job coaches, the staff in the facility, and the program directors, which I'm finishing up next month to hopefully kind of write up this and to get the perspectives on it. One thing I can tell you is doing these interviews is amazing. And it's really hard for me as a researcher because of my bias to having children with disabilities to not cry in some of the things that happen. And I'm really eager to get this published, and I can't wait to share it. But one of the things that was really special to me in some of these interviews is they know how they're being judged too. They are very aware. And I think sometimes people in society don't think that they are capable of thinking that sometimes, which is really disheartening, and a lot of that has kind of come out in some of the interviews that I've been doing with them. But most of them want to keep doing this. Both of them, they want to keep doing this. And I asked them, why haven't you been exposed to STEM before? They don't know. I said, if you were exposed to STEM fields earlier in your career, do you think you would have gone this route instead of picking some other career that you had originally had interest in before I did this presentation to them last summer? And they said, absolutely. So most of the job coaches through this process have also said, they've only needed my help for the first 2 months. Now I just kind of sit in a chair and diddle on my phone, and they just come to work and do what they need to do, and I barely need to supervise them. A lot of people in the lab said, you know, I wasn't sure if they were capable of doing this. I had a lot of paucity on this, but they've actually been great. They're actually some of the most reliable, dedicated coworkers compared to any of the other staff members in that lab. So just a little teaser of some of the things I've been finding. I'm sure none of that is surprising to any of you. So what are some of my next steps? My next steps are, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep identifying the gaps. There's a lot of procedural issues to hiring, onboarding, retention, training. I need to develop training guides. There's not a lot of training guides on how to train people with intellectual disabilities to work within labs. We want to develop that library. We want to develop those resource toolkits. So in year 2, that's what we're going to really focus on. We want to develop that curriculum. I want to be able to create a curriculum that I can just package up and say, here, this is how we did it. This is how we can shift it to work within your culture. Very similar to how Project Search works. I'm very fortunate to have Project Search at Cincinnati Children's, where it was started and founded, and that program is now expanded to over 500 sites worldwide. So I'm also working with that team to also develop out how can we also do a module in Project Search for STEM, because Project Search also doesn't have a STEM training module. Then I'm going to need to develop and document outcomes. Some of the ways that we had to convince people to take on this program is to prove to them the value of this. What's the employer's value? What's the value to the employee? What are those outcomes? What outcomes am I going to measure so I can document that? There's not a lot of information and literature on outcomes and the value of hiring people with disabilities into your organization, especially within the STEM field since this is new. And then finally, after all that's going, scale it up. How can we scale this up more? How can we expand it? And how can we go further? Cool. So Terry's going to come up and talk about her program now, and then we should have ample time at the end to still have a discussion. So.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you all for coming. I'm very excited to talk about our programs as well, because we believe that there is a very good fit for our students with the core facilities. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our students, and a lot of our students have disabilities, and some of them have disclosed it and many of them haven't. So I'm very excited to talk to you about those things, and I'm jumping ahead now in terms of age of students to college age students. So this is post-secondary. I actually, as I mentioned before, I started out in industry but had a passion for helping students to find their pathways into careers in the life sciences. And that led me to working for the State Chancellor's Office in California as a statewide director for life sciences and biotech, leading initiatives to help, as I mentioned before, faculty get training to better be able to train their students to meet industry needs, and also for the students and getting them this hands-on work-based learning experience. And one of the things we're really looking to do is not just focus on industry, but also focus on the core facilities, because you need workforce and our students need jobs and they need experience. So it's a really good fit. And so we're kind of pulling a couple of things together here and also tying it to the very real presence of individuals with disabilities throughout the whole system. So what kind of disabilities are we talking about? And this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but it gives you a sense, and I think most of us have been around people with disabilities that we understand. It could be physical impairments. Those would be visible disabilities. You can see if somebody's physically impaired. But you can't always completely see it. There's deafness and hard of hearing, and people can mask that. Also vision impairments, paraplegia. So those are some of the maybe more visible disabilities. And by the way, I'm going to take a step back for a second because I forgot to mention this is something I'm learning to do and practicing, and I'm not very good at yet. And that is, especially when there's people that are deaf or hard of hearing in an audience, we were able to get the closed captions, and thanks also to the help of Dr. Kate Mittendorf with that too. So we've got closed captions on the slides today. And also the other thing I'm trying to learn to practice is to pause for about 3 to 5 seconds at the start of each slide, every time I put up a new slide. Because if you're deaf or hard of hearing especially, or if English is your second language, it takes you a little while if you're trying to read closed captions, you're trying to read what's on the screen, and you're trying to take in what I'm talking about. So I've been talking about this long enough. You've probably had a chance to read this slide, so I am going to try to practice this more because I really need to learn how to do this better. So anyway, so the third thing is the individual disabilities, and these are the most challenging because not everybody is comfortable disclosing that they have these disabilities, or they might not even know they have these disabilities. ADHD is one in particular that it also can be tied with learning disabilities, autism and the spectrum disorders, anxiety disorders, traumatic brain injury. These are just some of the invisible disabilities. And I mentioned some people don't disclose because they don't even know they have these disabilities. And I'm one of those because I know because I have a brother who's been diagnosed with learning disabilities. I do have dyslexia because I see things the same way he does. And I learned about that, but I had never been diagnosed. But as I've been going through these, this work with students with disabilities and learning how to create pathways for them, I've identified a lot of different things with my abilities, with my reading and my learning and other learning type disabilities. So this is a diagram of a pathway. These are the pathways I want to talk about because I think this also can tie to your core facilities, and it also can help you kind of understand how our students are getting trained. And again, remember, I'm coming at this from the community college perspective. So in terms of biotech training, some high schools offer biotech training, not all of them do. But at the far left side of the diagram, if you think of this diagram here as a tube map or a BART or an underground, those maps show where you can get on and off the trains and what the routes are and how you can get to your final destination. And if you think of a pathway to your career from wherever your starting point is, that's what this diagram can also represent. So at the far left is starting with high school. So where high school biotech programs are offered, students have an opportunity to begin to learn about biotech and get exposed. And then the community college programs that I work with, those are the ones that actually have biotech or chemtech programs. And at local community colleges, these programs offer hands-on training, so there's skills. The students can earn credentials and certificates, and they can demonstrate their skills, and they can put those skills on their resumes. And so as they go through their pathway, they can pick up an associate's degree, they can pick up certificates, and they can also work. And we can get them into internships. We have an NSF Excellent grant that pays for them to do experiential learning. And Susan, who's going to be talking to you in a few minutes, is one of our collaborators, and she takes our students, she takes many of them, and she's done amazing work with them and given them amazing opportunities. And so when they finish their programs, they have skills, they know their way around the lab. So as you work your way towards kind of that center point where the pathways split, that would be completing a program, and it could be a certificate, it could be an associate's degree, and in California now, several of the colleges are offering bachelor's degree programs, and we have 5 colleges now that offer a bachelor's degree program in biomanufacturing. And we have one that's just about fully approved to offer a program in stem cell technologies. So those students have likely had a lot of work experience by the time they graduate. And then, so they can go on the pathway so once they get to the point of completing an associate's degree, they can go on and they can either transfer into one of the community college biotech programs or biomanufacturing programs, or they can continue to a 4-year university, and many of you are probably situated in 4-year universities too. These students end up getting snapped up in the labs, and they're very successful because by the time they get to the university, they know their way around the lab. And a lot of the facilities that do hire our students to work, or the professors that hire them to work on research projects, are thrilled with them because they do such a great job, because they know their way around the lab and they pick things up quickly. So in either event, they're getting work experience as they go, and then the ultimate goal is to have them get to the end of this pathway where they begin their careers in the life sciences. So as I mentioned, I do initiatives that provide faculty professional development, and some of the trainings we've provided to faculty include introduction to accessibility training and universal design for learning training. And these trainings were designed specially for us by the CAST, which is the Center for Applied Special Technologies. And in these trainings, then the faculty are learning techniques. We work with faculty and also our employer partners to take this training where they can learn different accommodations that they can provide for students on a digital level. So digital learning resources that'll help increase the accessibility of learning to make it more equitable. They learn how to transform materials into formats that accommodate different learning styles. And all of this benefits not only those with disabilities, but all kinds of learners. As I mentioned, those with English as a second language. There's a lot of great digital techniques that where you can change things around to make fonts bigger. You can work with different colors to contrast and make things visually easier to distinguish. So there's quite a few learnings. And by the way, we recorded those trainings, and I have those available. So if anybody's interested, each training is 90 minutes long. And so if you're interested in doing that online, just send me an email and let me know, and I will send you a link so that you can access those trainings. And so we did do a survey at the end of those trainings. We just ran those the first time last fall, and we included both educators and employers. And these are some of the ways that the trainings have been implemented. As far as the educators, they've used them, they use the captioning on videos. They've changed around text for figures to make them more clear, easier to read. They've made the language more clear on exams and quizzes, and they've learned how to think about how to ask questions so that they're testing what they want to test, and not, the questions are less misleading or, misunderstood. And they've incorporated institutional training as well. And from the employers, we've heard also that they're using the closed captions, the alternate text styles. They're using descriptive links, but not always as consistently. So they're creating landing pages that have accessibility in mind for their students for both disabilities and neurodiversity. And they've been applying UDL principles. And I know that Susan is going to talk more about that. She's going to provide examples as an employer working with students and using these different ways to make learning more accessible. So this working with students, especially with disabilities, it takes a village. And this is a group of partners that we have in Southern California that have been working fairly closely together for the past few years. And in doing this, this has been a project that has not had any funding, but yet it has a lot of passion. And so the passion is why we have a lot of people that have participated in this, and most are doing this as volunteers, which is what makes it even better. So starting with MiraCosta College, and the photo up at the top there, we had a special visit from Sam Johnston at CAST, And so we took her on a tour of our new biotech building at Maricosta College. And in that photo too, there's one of the department chairs for biotechnology. There's student accessibility services are represented here, and also the Bioscience Workforce Development Hub, which is my group. And one of the very interesting things in this brand new building that was built to specifications and met all the ADA requirements, we found a lot of problems with it because the building plans were several years old, and then it took a few years to build it, and now it's open, and it's really still not. It might be up to code, but it's not up to need. And so one of the great things out of this collaboration in this tour was that it brought the faculty together with the student accessibility services so that they can work. They've been going through the building and trying to correct some of these problems that they found. Open Biopharma, Susan, and the picture at the bottom was a group of us meeting to talk about the issues related to providing better services for students on both the training side and the employment side. And then Innovate Bio, that's the National Biotech Education Center, is represented, CAST, of course. We have the California Department of Rehabilitation there, and that's the woman in the lower right side of the bottom figure, that's Carla Martinez. And she's done a lot of wonderful things for our students, and Susan has a lot of experience working with her and using her help with our students. And RX Research Services is another partner we have 2 apprenticeship grants with. And so one is a pre-apprenticeship grant and one is an apprenticeship grant, and they both cover food safety and biotech. And so she is another passionate partner that takes our students and works with them to help them launch their careers in the life sciences. And then I mentioned we have an NSF Excellent grant that pays for our students to get to do these hands-on work-based learning experiences. And this list is a list of things that the students get to learn and get to do. So the Excellent acronym actually stands for Experiential Learning in Emerging and Novel Technologies. And these are novel technologies in the life sciences, as you know. And I think I'm going to take a pause for a moment because I want Susan to give Susan an opportunity to talk about some of these technologies that she's been working with the students on, because they're pretty extraordinary for what our students are coming out knowing how to do. Do you want to add anything to this? Or? Okay. All right. So I'll let Susan take over in a couple of minutes. So, and these are 3 of our students, and the 2 that are wearing the gowns, those are 2 of our grant funders, and they came for a tour at Open Biopharma, and these 3 students have been in a couple of our internship programs. And so they were helping to lead the tour for our grant funders and made those grant funders do a full gowning. So there they are, completely gowned up and ready to do cell culture work. Not that we made them do that. And just sharing a few photos of our students and the opportunities we provide. The community college students are very diverse, and they come from diverse backgrounds. Many of them are single parents. They're non-traditional. Many of them are first generation to go to college. And so these opportunities are life-changing for them. And for those that have disabilities, it's even more life-changing because it gives them an opportunity to get started and get that experience and then get to go on and launch their careers. And so on the left, in the photo on the left, the girl that's on the right, Marielle, just finished her internship at Blue Nalu, which they make cell-cultured fish. So she got a very unique emerging technology experience. And on the right, this was at the SoCal Bio Investor conference, and the young gentleman in there, Raphael, just finished his internship doing quality control at a company called Kalidi, and there he is with Susan, and he was networking and working the crowd like I've never seen before, and I was so proud of him. And then on the left side, this was at the NSF ATE Principal Investigators Conference, the Advanced Technical Education. And the young woman in the middle is one of our interns, and she was selected to be on a special student panel at that conference. And then, of course, two of our students that did internships in LA. They go to one of the community colleges in Los Angeles, and they were presenting a poster on their work at a local conference. And by the way, we work with so colleges all around the state. So in our first year of this NSF grant, we placed 18 students. Actually, we've now had 26 students complete internships from 4 colleges in 3 regions at 8 companies, including Open Biopharma. And then finally, several of our students, not only have they gone through our excellent programs, but the Center, suddenly the acronym just skipped my mind, I'm just drawing a blank, for regenerative medicine, the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine. We have a grant with them, and they pay students for year-round internships. And so in a couple of our student spotlights, both Joanna in this photo and then also Dennis in this photo are 2 of our students that did do a full year of the CERM Compass internship, and they completed their bachelor's degree. And they both, Joanna has gone on to graduate school, and she's working on her master's degree, and Dennis is working in industry now. He's been in industry for about the last 6 months. So we're very proud of these students, and I just wanted to introduce you to a little bit to see what our students look like, what kind of training they have, what these pathways are, and we're going to also tie this to how you can maybe integrate in working with students, also being open to those with disabilities. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Susan.
This is open biopharma, so we have training labs, and as you can see on the picture, we don't have the shelves with the reagents. So the students are at the bench, and there is no shelf, so every reagent and tools are down below. So it's accessible, they don't have to climb. The second one is our training room, and the rest of it just shows the student working in our facilities, some of them in certain training programs. So our goal was to train the students to make them industry ready. And we see a few problems with, and I can maybe go to the next slide, and how do I go to the next one? Okay. So I was looking at to see why people don't hire easily students with disabilities. So I was curious how many of our Nobel Prize winners actually have disabilities. And I was shocked because it's most of them. So a lot of the people who actually get Nobel Prize, so the 1% or 3% who makes it in STEM, they actually apparently make it to the top, which is really nice. So it's encouraged me that really the students have a lot more capabilities than we expect from them. And I think we should really fully let them live up to those abilities. And so I got the statistics. It's same as Nicole got, that about 67 million adults, 27% of the population has disabilities, and only 3% are in STEM. And I agree partially because they don't speak up and they say that they have disabilities, but I still think it's a lower population that are with disabilities. So I think science has a skew. And I think there was a really interesting article, I want to bring it to everybody's attention, that science needs neurodiversity. And if you read it, it's actually interesting because it gives you certain capabilities that if you don't have the neurodiversity, you actually don't have. So I think it's a It's a really interesting, kind of eye-opening for me. So our goal was to basically build a training and make the students industry ready. So first of all, we wanted to make sure they fully, accepted there, and it's an open field. And for us, it was really interesting to see that some of the students who came, and for example, I was told that don't be surprised, they don't really talk. And once they felt comfortable and accepted in that environment, I was surprised that they talk. So I think it's a lot of the things that we see. Sometimes it's because it's a non-accepting environment. And once they feel comfortable, they feel different. And we have students who, I would say, severely autistic, and is coming back for the second summer for internships. I'm really happy to see that, and that was a very successful one too. And so the goal is to make them industry ready, and then also start to work with the industry. So see the industry pain points. So industry has one big problem, that actually human errors cost a lot of money. To give you an example, for Roche Genentech, it's a large company. Annually, they lose $400 million from human errors. And we pay for it in our drug prices. But it's a lot of money. So, and when we talk to industry, human error reduction is a really key things that they are interested. So we're focusing our training on partial and human error reduction, making sure that every student who comes through our program can really pipette well, can really measure well. They know that they shouldn't leave the balance out under the unethical balance and under the air conditioning thing, because they're not going to measure. So the basics of how to measure, how to pipette, how to transfer liquids, how to pump things. So the things that is key for everything. So make sure they really know that. We also started to develop a different way to evaluate skills. So, and we actually have an AI expert from Amazon. So instead of doing the standard multiple test questions, we actually built kind of like a video game. So they answer questions with real answers, and then the AI assesses that what is their skill level, and then gives them more tasks along those skill levels. So somebody who can progress faster, they're gonna go in a different path. So it's really like a video game. You can explore different paths. But actually it gives them an unbiased skill assessment. So we know how far we can push somebody or how quickly we can develop them versus how much we have to focus to work more on certain skills. And I think this is a good example of AI. We also train our students on AI, because I think now the industry needs AI and laboratories need AI. So we train them on AI. They also know how to write polite letters using ChatGPT, and how to write protocols in the style of Zsa Zsa Gabor. So because it's tools. So we're actually going to present at the Parental Association annual national conference or parallel ChatGPT project that we were building together with the students. So I think it's really cool. We also have a facility with digital twin, which actually could give you, so digital twin is really good because, for example, if you manage a facility, and there was a good example, somebody at Pfizer, they got into an accident and got paralyzed, so they couldn't climb up to see things in a facility. With a digital twin, they could manage the facility and actually have somebody go up there and change the right parts. So you have some of these incredible tools now that opens the door for people, and we try to use them in our things. And for example, the core that Terri mentioned, our core is different because we don't have a bunch of researchers we have to serve, so we can't have 10,000 samples of sequencing. So what we did is we basically built a core around the technology which we think is an upcoming technology. So stem cells have limitations for transplantation because when they go into an environment, they might behave differently. So exosomes could be a good potential next generation of therapeutics, but there is no regulatory pathways. So we decided with the students we address some of the regulatory pathways for that. And it gives them a chance to actually learn multiple technology from sequencing, proteomics, chromatography, cell culture, bacterial culture. And we're working on solving industry problems with them, and then transferring it into manufacturing, writing SOPs, how to reduce human errors. And then what we also build is how to start to work with the industry. So the thing we do now is that we build partnership with the industry, with the Workforce Ready human error reduction program, and starting to work with them, because a lot of our students don't interview well, and that's a huge barrier to get into some of these companies, because they just simply don't interview, they don't look you in the eye, or they, so they don't interview, or they don't talk. So what we're doing now is we're working with the industry, because a lot of them just hire temps, especially at first. So we basically said, okay, here is the skill set our students have, and if you need temps, work with us, and you save 4 to 6 weeks of training to bring a new intern or a new temp in. And this way the students have a chance to check out the companies and check out multiple companies, and the companies interview them at the wet lab. And that's when they can shine. So, what I see that, I had some feedbacks from companies where they said, you told me that this person has disability and they work like great. And I said, yeah, they do have a disability, and yeah, they do work great. So, but if they would have gone through a traditional interview, they wouldn't even set foot at that facility. So I think, if we work creatively and work out programs, how we can do things and not why we can't do them, and actually instead of changing people's perception, potentially just changing how you address their issues with that, potentially could be a really good program. And now we have 14 students, so 7 of them went toward the master program, and they actually been really successful. And 7 of them are graduating from bachelor program, and we're going to take on more students. So this was our pilot was about 3 students, and now we are at 14. And I think it's a potentially, something that can be scaled. And the reason, now we look at being a core facility, and the reason I'm here, because we build a core around EVs and exosomes. And I think for a resume, so when a student can say they worked at a core facility, that sells them. Sorry to say that, but this is a really good, career building opportunity. And so for us, it's good. But I think also students who come out from our mini core around the EVs could actually go into core labs and work with them. And I think what core labs win from hiring these people, that there is an enormous potential at the core lab just hiring people with neurodiversity, because they bring in really, really cool sets. So for example, some of our students who are autistic, they find the smallest errors. Like, I'm incredible. And, we looked through 3 times, we couldn't find the error, and they, boom, smallest error, and they catch it. So they bring a lot to the table. They also, a lot of them are systematic thinker and problem solvers. They look for patterns and they see them, which other people might not see them. So I think they bring something to the table. These are the meticulous observant. A lot of them really, really like the rules. So I think a core facility have a lot of rules and how you do things, and they actually like them. Not everybody likes them. Not everybody cut out for science gonna like the rules and the more regulated environment. And some of them, especially the ADHD, they're really good at multitasking. I wouldn't test the autistic spectrum for multitasking, but the ADHDs are really good at multitasking. And then there is another thing is they're extremely loyal. So what I hear from people in core labs, that they keep losing their people. You don't want to lose your people, hire them. Because they're going to be loyal, and partially a lot of them going to be afraid to change jobs, because they're so important for them to have the healthcare benefits. So they don't want to gap it or lose it for any time. So I think those are important. And this is our faculty. So about 90% of our apprenticeship, and now we do the apprenticeship program, has disabilities. 100% of our faculty has. And I think it's this good example that we would like to scale and give it to others to work with, because I really don't think that we should just have it for a few students. I think if possible, we would like to be able to give it to other people to take it and go with it. So we're building a curriculum that can be then transferred to other community colleges or other partnerships. And I think we are very lucky to be a nonprofit, because our chain of command is very short and our flexibility is very big, so we don't have to sell a lot to management, and maybe that's why we were able to do this. I just wanted to give an example of how we can do this, and why also we would love to work with other core facilities, either to transfer some of the things we do or to transfer some of our students. So we are the core facility who don't mind if we lose our students. So take them. And they are extremely good. So we had one student presenting their data to a CEO of a German company, and the guy just dropped dead. He was surprised that this was a bachelor student. He thought it was a PhD level work. So I think as far as I'm concerned, they are incredible. And I'm really happy to work with them. So if anybody has questions, please.
Ratna from Cincinnati Children's. Our question is, as a recruiter, how do you advertise vacancies so that we tap this type of talents? As a recruiter, how do you advertise vacancies in a core facility so that we can tap these kind of talents?
Oh, okay. So how we recruit the students?
Yeah, if I have a vacancy in my facility, how do I advertise it so that I can actually
How do you do?
advertise?
Reach out to us.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, just
Okay.
Yeah, reach out to us, and if you have opening, we are happy to send students. And we also, in San Diego, we would love to have an opportunity, if somebody has core facilities there, to maybe do some rotations with the students. So things that we don't do a lot, they see more the mass production as well. But feel free to reach out. But we recruit our students from Miracosta. So our pipeline is partially Miracosta, partially Terri was introducing Carla Martinez. California has a program called Pathway to Success. It's a test program right now, and I hope it's going to move on. But this is basically how to bring students with disabilities to higher paying jobs. And so we get some of our students from them as well, but we really like, so most of our pipeline is Miracosta students, and there is a lot of diversity being a community college. They have, students who came from, first generation, have disabilities, single parents, or they came from, foster care and other things. So we have a very diverse group of students.
Hi, I was wondering if we could ask questions kind of broadly to the panel? Yeah. Okay, cool. Hi, my name's Kristen. I just first wanted to say that a lot of what you guys were talking about brought me pretty close to tears, so thank you. I am definitely one of those not 3%ers with invisible disabilities that are pretty afraid of disclosing what I have. And for, I definitely fall into like a combination of like physical and like visible and invisible disabilities. So I'm just kind of wondering, like my general fear surrounding that is potentially being held back on like promotions, or like if I'm ready to try and like advance my career and outside of my current employer, like, being held back or judged in that kind of way. And I'm wondering what we can start doing personally to like work either with our own employers or just the community at whole to really show that, regardless of what is going on with you, that like you are really capable, and also just kind of dealing with if I need to use like my mobility aid, being afraid of being judged, at work, and having like those eyes on me all the time. So, yeah, I'm just kind of wondering, like, where do you guys kind of see like those kinds of things going? What can we do to like help advocate for ourselves, but also for other people that might be dealing with similar things in a workplace, especially when HR and like the current climate is maybe not a great time for that kind of stuff.
So one thing we started at Cincinnati Children's is an employee resource group. And I don't know if you have these where you're located. I don't know how many people actually have these in their institution. But we advocated for an employee resource group that's called Disabled Enabled. And it's comprised of individuals that have visible, invisible, and physical disabilities. We also have a representative from HR that sits on this group with us. And it's been an eye-opening experience on many fronts because the HR representative is educating us on his perspective, and we're educating him on our perspective. From this meeting, it's a once-a-month meeting that we have, and it's on Teams. We have a lot of discussions that come out of it, and we are always setting goals. And so a lot of the conversation we have right now are on a couple things. Emergency management plans. How do we get people out of the building in emergencies? Because right now, if you're in a wheelchair, you sit in a stairwell. So we're currently advocating to get these devices that can carry people down the stairs with ease so that they can actually evacuate the building and not have to be left in the building. Because we have a couple of people with spina bifida that need help. The other thing that came from it is hiring practices. This HR rep was not aware of some of the challenges that I shared earlier on the need to balance benefits, on how much someone makes, especially, keep in mind, I'm focusing on intellectual disabilities, so people that have some cognitive delays. These guys are more like the neurodiverse group. It's 27 people in America have a disability. There are a lot of different disabilities. So you have to kind of look at how you're going through some of these angles on the resources that you need. The other thing we're navigating is how people can safely disclose to their supervisor the resources and supports that they need in a safe space. You're not alone in how you feel. A lot of people on this ERG feel the same way you do. And so we have a lot of safe conversations on this ERG where we try to work with our HR rep, who's also in a safe space with us, to understand how people can advocate for themselves. These conversations alone once a month have allowed people to develop that self-advocacy, the courage that you need to take those first steps to have that first conversation. It's the first conversation that's always the hardest because you don't know how they're going to react. And so you set the parameters in your conversation, and we talk about how to develop those advocacy skills with your supervisor. And the person that sits on our ERG with us, who hears these conversations on a monthly basis, is willing to go to those meetings and support that individual that's ready to have the conversation. So that's one way that we've been kind of exploring how to open up those conversations, how to develop more inclusive communities around us to support employee needs, because it's an employee resource group. We want to make sure our employees are supported and heard and getting the resources they need to be able to do their job day in and day out. So it's one thing that you could potentially pitch to your leadership. I know it's scary, but it's something that's really helped us in the long run is having that employee resource group, and has actually garnered a ton of support from our leadership. They've actually started to come to us on ideas like, what's an adult changing table? We're a children's hospital, and we do have children that still wear diapers that are above the age of 8. We have 3 of them in our entire hospital. And so we have to educate them on how to build accessible spaces and bathrooms. We're working on how to build an accessible playground at Children's. You know, as a pediatric hospital, I would hope that we would be more at the forefront of developing these accessible spaces because we're at a pediatric hospital. But we're still having these conversations. Even though we have all those laws in place, society is still catching up. And it's up to us to speak up, to advocate. Anything else?
I mean, I think it's also a catch-22. So if you are afraid to speak up because you think that there's going to be a consequence, you're already setting the tone that the other person not going to accept you as it is. And so I'm a physician. I don't know anybody who was not disabled at one point because we broke our legs, we have depression because we lose things, we have anxiety because we have kids, we are pregnant, and we have to put, things, or we have to work with crutches or things. So I think, we can relate if it's an open conversation, but when you assume that the other person not gonna, then you're gonna hold back, and that's a catch-22, because then it's very hard to work with it. So I think it's basically openness and just believe that the other person may be decent.
So I'll just add a couple comments, and that is, first of all, if you don't have access to, a group that's actually proactively trying to make it a more welcoming environment, obviously you would need to trust someone, and including your supervisor, if you choose to disclose. And in this environment, you're going to have to be careful, and you're going to have to really, trust your gut on that. But there are also other services, like, for example, the Department of Rehabilitation. We've had students go to them, and without telling us, they don't have to tell us who they are, that they're working with the Department of Rehabilitation or anything, and that is a third party that are professionals, and there's not going to be a threat, and that could be also an alternative for you to get some, help, and also start building some trust, and at least get the resources that you need.
Thank you. I'm so grateful for that question, because I would like to now flip it around, and as an employer, what would you advise that I do to kind of honor different people's need for privacy and ability to self-advocate while I'm trying to offer accommodation?
My biggest thing is just let it be known to your employees that you're open, you're available, you're a safe space to talk to, you're going to be supporting. That's usually the first biggest step, and that's probably a step that they're not used to experiencing in some ways, but just kind of just saying it, just like, you're here. That's step one, right? Step two, open it up in a lab meeting or a conversation. I'm here to help. How can you guys help? Where do you want to be in your career? How do I need to help you get there? What are some of your challenges?
There is also a very good resource, at least the California DOR has a resource of the etiquette of how to work with people with disability. So, and this was developed by people with disabilities. So it treats actually the employers of what would be a good etiquette and how you handle it, and yeah. So I think if you can reach out, I can try to get that resource for you. I think it's really good to start up some of the conversation, but I would say openness from both sides helps.
Okay.
I have a question, but before I do that, I actually did want to respond to the original question about, disclosure. So I think, so I have a walker. I am now a visibly disabled person, but for a long time I was an invisibly disabled person. And I think what I found through disclosure is that, yes, there are people in the world who will judge you for your abilities before they know what they really are, or who develop preconceived biases. But what there also are a lot of people who are willing to either learn how to be better advocates and allies, or they actually are that person who's safe. And, in my own talk this morning, I talked about how I was, recruited back, and they actually put all these accommodations in place on day one before I ever joined. And it was through the relationship that I had developed with that employer before, which was positive, where my disability had been disclosed the first time, and then they knew I was having trouble with accommodations at my next job. And during COVID, when they opened up remote work at my previous institution, they were like, let's get this person back, because they saw me for what I was able to contribute. And, you know, I have one boss who's like, yeah, Kate disappears for half the time, and yet they're like 10 times more efficient than a lot of people. So it doesn't matter if they're only there for 34 business hours that week, they will get done, you know, at least twice the work as many people. So, you know, I think one benefit of disclosure is that you find the people that you really want to work for and the teams that you really want to be on. So if you're in a place where you know, you're not at a loss for a job, I actually find that disclosure during the application process can help, because if they hire you knowing you have a disability, they're probably going to be a pretty good employer.
So I had a question on SSDI. Oh, yes. Sorry, I thought you were done. Sorry. Okay. Yes, you brought up this SSDI issue a couple of times, and the limits are really low. It's like $2,000 a year. So one, how did you sort of get around that, and how did you get around that in a way that wasn't taking advantage of that person in a different way? Because, you know, we all try to pay our interns because it's important that they feel valued in that way. You know, we all try to make sure that our staff has parity. You know, that's a different equity and inclusion type of discussion. So, you know, one, do you find that value is seen the same way? And two, how do you make sure there's not some jerk of a professor that says, oh, I can only pay this person 4 cents an hour and I'm just going to get 8 of them?
There's a lot of advocacy being done right now on pay for people with disabilities. That's running through the different states. I think Ohio finally just passed their law on equitable pay for people with disabilities. But one area that is a big concern for those with intellectual developmental disabilities, they can speak more to the neurodiverse population, is we're actually looking at pathways of using ABLE. I don't know if you guys know what ABLE is. I think all 50 states have it now. I'm not sure. Does it? Okay. They do have different rules, but ABLE is a place where you can put money that can go towards their cost of living, and it does not impact their benefits that they get from the state and federal government.
And employers? Sorry.
Employers need to work out that pathway. We are working out that pathway now, because I've been speaking to some legal advisors on this might be a good loophole to solve it, but we haven't, again, I'm only in my first year, so we haven't solved for it, but that's kind of where we're looking at how we can support people with like cognitive delays that want to work more hours. And it's gonna be person dependent as well, because some people only want to work 1 day a week. Some want a full-time job. So it's just going to be person dependent in how we work with our HR and how we kind of figure out that pathway. So I can see this as a big challenge for more of the neurodiverse populations, like those with autism and other disabilities that do want long-term full-time jobs, a full career. And some of the things that you have to look at that is the cost, benefits, pros, cons of if they become a full-time employee and obtain that same pay as their peers, what other resources do they need that they can tap into? Because again, every state is different. This is the challenge. Mm-hmm. Some states will still look at income. Some states still have ways that you can still get support, like transportation vouchers to help with transportation. But it's really tricky because every state's different, and it drives me nuts, but every state's different. Do you guys have ways around it?
I don't know how California has ways, but what we do is basically we do the matrix of, you know, the mini certification matrix, and basically you pay based on the skills. And if they have more skills and they can contribute more, they get more. So it's basically, it's set for what are the minimum skills you need to basically keep a job or have a job in the industry. And then what are the skills that are extra skills and that should earn more. And we kind of tell the students that they are their own business. So if they can offer more products and products that people are looking for, there is a higher value. So we basically tell them to self-advocate in terms of skill-based pay. And I think that's the fair pay.
We are at the end of our session time, so if you guys want to go, it's fine, but we're happy to stay and keep talking.
My question that I didn't ask was about Terry's materials, but it's to all of you. She mentioned these cast materials. And first of all, I want the link, but we're already connected, so I'll get it from you. But I would love to convince the faculty in my program where I teach to also watch them and take them to heart. And you've all sold your ideas to other individuals. So how do I convince a very resistant faculty, or maybe these folks who may have, other managers who are, doing training with individuals, how do I convince them to watch materials like that or do trainings like that and take them to heart?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it in the beginning initially comes down to a coalition of the willing, and you have to find those supporters and have conversations with them and offer it, and maybe even have a session to talk about it and invite others, because even if they didn't see it, if they didn't watch it, but if they can hear the conversations going on, it might trigger some things that make them think about it. And another thing that I've been thinking about, how many of you are in cores that are associated with a university, a college or a university? Okay, most of you are. So the universities, they're going to have some sort of an office of support, accessible learning, accessibility support, student support services that specialize in students with disabilities and special needs. And it would really be worth your while to strike up a conversation with them, go into their office and start talking to them and learn more about what those students do, because we've been finding too that they're very interested in what we're doing with the biotech faculty, and we've been bringing faculty together with their student support services, and so that the faculty are learning more and they're bringing that back into the classroom as well. So these are, so to your point, it's not easy to get people involved if they don't see the need, and we're in a climate where that's kind of going more in that direction. But the more that you can just at least offer it and present it and have conversations about it, and the more people are going to start hearing it. And even if they're not interested, they're going to still hear something about it, and every little bit helps.
I think there is another, so if people teach, the pipeline that is coming down from college, pipeline from elementary school, middle school, there's a lot of neurodiversity, and if they don't pick up these, they're going to be not effective at teaching some of the next generation, and it's going to come back on the reviews.
Okay. One more question really quickly, and then we probably have to, I think we're getting kicked out.
Great session and great talk. I will try to be short. So what you've shown, it is like all on-site education and teaching. Are there any programs, or you think it is possible to develop remote training, and for example, mostly like for remote work, because there are autistic people and some other that cannot be so easily moved into the college or whatever environment?
Actually, so we including some interesting new training tools. So one of them is virtual reality. So it's actually biomanufacturing virtual reality is really cool, because you can't blow up a biomanufacturing plant and see what people would do. So you actually mimic it in a virtual reality. And the other is the augmented reality. So both are actually very good training tools that are coming down. And we actually do a mixed one. So we teach AI, and some of those things students do at home. We just have to some of the laboratory skills is quite effective. Some others you can't really train without the lab. But for example, the digital twin and tools like that, you actually virtually going and walking to a facility and looking at things. So we are exploring more, so we have partners who are in rehab and we have partners in AI. I used to be a surgeon, so now I can do surgery, for example, through a glass. Somebody is an expert, somebody else, and actually they see what you see and they can correct you. So you theoretically could do it almost at home, and somebody can watch you, make sure you do it, and actually gives you the muscle memory that you have. So you actually could learn something.
So briefly, there are such possibilities, but not very wide yet.
No, but I think it's coming in, and those tools actually. So we look at the AR and VR that we potentially could transfer these training classes to some of the community colleges and work with the AR companies that they would bring out the equipment for their portions of the accountable system, because we could expand the training and actually the students with disabilities this is actually really cool.
Okay, we're 10 minutes over.